Well, all right. As I explained in the show, this is a bonus interview that we're pushing out to YouTube. It's an interview with Ross McKerchar, who is the CISO of Sophos, and we are discussing the company's report into, I guess, what you'd call it, maybe a counterintelligence operation. Ross, thanks for joining us. How did I go with the pronunciation of your last name there, by the way?
Bang on. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. All right, so look, just we should probably just set this up and explain to people what the report actually covered. I mean, I suppose a synopsis is that Sophos received some indications that its devices were being targeted. Certain customers were being attacked with zero-day exploits, and you were able to gradually sort of figure out where the test machines were that people were doing the vulndev on, and then you were able to send over some code that would collect additional telemetry from those vulndev boxes, and that sort of gave you a bit of insight into what these attackers were doing, and this unfolded over a period of something like 6 years. I mean, that's about the long and short of it, isn't it?
Yeah, you got it just right, absolutely.
Yeah, okay. So let's start with the genesis of this thing. Whose idea was this? How did it come up as an idea, which is, hey, why don't we push out some additional monitoring on boxes that we know adversaries are doing vulndev on?
I mean, it wasn't a kind of light bulb moment. It was just an obvious extension of the previous activity. So it starts where we see that little bit of that early indicators of compromise. That device was suspicious. It was natural to look into the telemetry of that device, and then we pushed out some telemetry improvements so we could get a better understanding of when that device was online. And then when it was online, we sort of thought, you know what? I think it was in a meeting. It wasn't a specific, it wasn't a specific person or anything, but we just kind of talked ourselves slowly into it. Our guiding principle was, let's keep our customers safe, and it seemed like an obvious way of doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just wondering though, and it's a question, like I kicked this around in the Risky Biz Slack before we had this call, and this was going to be a question of mine, but Tom Uren also said, here's a question for you. Did you have to clear this with legal, and what was their reaction? Because I'd imagine that it would have involved, them having a look at their, the license agreements basically for these boxes to see if this was something you could even do, or, was there any sort of legal dimension to this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we definitely took counsel. I mean, we were also working with law enforcement at this time as well. So yeah, we did it very carefully. And as you're right, I mean, I can't go into specifics around the legal counsel, but the EULA was certainly part of it. Yeah, absolutely. And then from a technical perspective as well, we never actually moved off the device itself. So we were on the Sophos device. Sure, it was an attacker own device, if that makes sense. I mean, it was a trial device. They weren't licensed, they weren't customers, but we were very careful. I mean, we didn't even, we passively observed the network, but we didn't scan the network, for instance, to see what was behind the device. So we were very, very careful about how we operated and stayed within those constraints.
Yeah, no, that 110% makes sense. But I'm guessing Sophos doesn't have much of a presence in the Chinese market, because that could have been a consideration as well, surely.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a small presence in Hong Kong, and obviously we're in Taiwan as well. But yeah, we're not heavy in China at all. We've got very few devices over there.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. And I'm guessing after this, it's probably not going to be a huge growth region for you. I mean, was that a consideration that came up at all?
I mean, we've not had China as a growth target for many years now, so not really. No, I wouldn't say so.
Yeah. Now, it occurs to me that this is similar, what you've done. So it is interesting, because another question I was going to ask is whether or not you'd done similar instrumentation of some of your software products that run on, Windows machines. And I'm guessing the answer there is no.
No, absolutely not in that way. I mean, obviously, the parallels with EDR capability are interesting, and one of the unusual pieces around some of the reactions that we've been looking online is maybe a lack of understanding of quite how well instrumented modern corporate endpoints are in this respect. I would have loved to have had our EDR capability on our full EDR capability on our firewall, because that far surpassed anything we did with the implant. But absolutely, of course, we would never use that capability on the endpoint side in the way that we used it on that device.
I know there's been some weird reactions to this with people saying, "Oh my God, I don't want to run an EDR because people might do this." And like, what do you think EDR is? This is like literally what EDR actually does. But funnily enough, the closest thing that I can think of that mirrors what you've done here is actually Kaspersky collecting a bunch of exploit dev work off an NSA contractor's or an NSA staffer's computer. That's the only thing that I can think of that's similar. And it makes me think that there is something to this idea that security companies need to operate kind of with geopolitics in mind, right? Like, I can't imagine that you would be continuing this operation if you were dropping the same code on a device that turned out to be at Bletchley Park or Fort Meade, right? I mean, I don't think this is a controversial topic. You kind of got to pick a side.
No, I'm with you on that. I mean, we were thinking about even how much we've collaborated with with law enforcement and various government agencies on this. I think the world's changed a lot in the last decade. Kind of go back 10 years. You kind of like the memories of Snowden are still quite relevant, and it would have been unusual for us to have worked so closely with NCSC, NSA, JCDC on this stuff, but the world's a very different place now, and as you say, you kind of got to choose your side, and all those organizations have been, incredibly supportive and helpful throughout this.
Yeah. Okay. So what were the tangible results of this program? What were the tangible results of what you did here? Because I'm guessing what it would have meant is you would have been getting a very early heads up on successful O-Day, which would have meant faster patch turnarounds. Did you get insight also into, were you able to roll out quicker detections for some of these things and see where they were targeting? Like, what were the actual tangible results you achieved by doing this?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, both basically. I think the first win that we had was when we identified them developing an exploit. Most of what we saw, I wouldn't actually call it vulnerability research. It was more exploit development. The difference being they were figuring out how to chain their vulnerability with their post-exploitation tools, and they were just trying to get that end-to-end attack working. That was another reason that kind of gave us confidence to make that step. I think it would have been more interesting if we'd gone after kind of like base vulnerability researchers, because that's obviously legit, a very legitimate activity. But this was very much exploit development. So the first piece we saw was them was developing a actually quite a nice vulnerability, better than the ones we'd seen before. This one was in an auth component. It meant that they could get straight in as root, so there was no privilege chaining inside, which they had to mess around with, or privilege escalation. So that was a really nice vuln from their perspective, and it was really very satisfying to burn that. We did see it used in the wild, but only twice, and only against what I'd consider potentially quite high value targets. So we managed to burn it before they used it for against any other high value targets, or given at that moment they seemed to be focused on building up orbs. That potentially prevented quite a widespread attack. And then later on in the program, we retrieved quite a few bits of malware. I mean, a lot of it was kind of relatively uninteresting, kind of open source tooling, but a couple of bits stand out. First was the rootkit that we call libsophos. It's also known as libgoat, which is why NCSC called it pygmy goat. That's a really interesting bit of malware, and of course, that allowed us to roll out some detections, preemptively across our estate. And then secondly, there was the bootkit, the Eufy malware. We saw that very early on in its development stages. So it was a very simple bit of malware. I mean, it just ran a single line of code, but I mean, I guess that's all you need from a bootkit. You just need that for persistence. So absolutely, yeah, both basically.
Yeah, so I mean, were you at all worried that if you kept squashing stuff that they were rolling out on these dev boxes, that they might realize something was up?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we were playing that game all the way through. So we were very careful about the detections that we rolled out. We were very careful, obviously, to keep things off VirusTotal, anything like that. And then the patches that we rolled out, the auth one was funny because we had to obfuscate it. So we basically tried to we made it.
Did you try to make it look like an accidental patch?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so we just kind of cleaned up a bunch of code in the same area and tried to pretend that we'd to pretend that we'd fixed it, because yeah, we knew they were monitoring our hot fixes, and then we went through a period where we actually blocked hot fixes, but then we rolled that back for their devices, so they didn't receive the patches. But then we realized that they probably noticed that as well, because they'd start to query why their device had a different hotfix version than the other devices. So yeah, we played the whole game in our head, multiple times to try and stay ahead of them. Over time, though, they did, and whether it was something we did or whether this was just a general improvement in their operation, there was a steady arc of kind of OPSEC improvements. Those systems, they'd pop up rarer and rarer over time, and we actually haven't seen one for I think over a year now. So
which is why you're talking about it now, I guess, right? And
yeah.
So that's the interesting thing, because after a while, you found the patient zero devices. Then you attributed those devices to a couple of organizations, which, I mean, it's all in the report. One is a university, I believe. The other one is a company in China that were doing this, exploit dev work. So was it then the case that every time you would see another device pop up in that range, you would drop your special magical telemetry rootkit on those devices? Is that pretty much how it was happening?
Yeah, but I mean that was one of the techniques. That range was super interesting to us. There were a few other tells as well. Like that wasn't the only thing that we'd use, but that was one of the key pieces. We developed quite a nice methodology for kind of identifying likely the way they registered trials on our on our website, for instance, to actually gain access to the device and the licenses was another factor that we could fingerprint. So we just rolled with that for good couple of years.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Now, I believe also, weren't some of these guys, these people, weren't they actually reporting some of these bugs to bug bounty programs as well, and like trying to get paid on the side? And we saw that was at the iSoon leaks, right? We saw that the vuln dev and the exploit dev ecosystem in China, like no one's getting paid what they would get paid in the West, right? Which is why you see all these weird side hustles. Were these people trying to side hustle through your bounty program?
I mean, that's what it looks like to us. What I don't understand is, or what we don't understand is how close they were to the front line, to the exploit devs, and then to the frontline groups. Because if you look at that ecosystem, we got a lot of insight. The iSoon leak was really interesting because although there wasn't anything specific, I think a couple of small overlaps in terms of what we saw, but it was more the feel of it. It made a lot of sense to us. So we didn't see we're not sure if those vuln researchers were the same people on keyboards that we were keeping an eye on.
I totally get where you're coming from, which is it could have been some of the people who were given these exploits to go and do things with, and they were thinking, well, I would quite like to buy a new car. Maybe I'll just sneak off and report this to Sophos and see if I can get some money. I mean, it could be that sort of vibe.
It could have been the other side as well. It could have been the original vuln researchers that are, they might be patriotically aligned with China, but they might not even be working. They might be independent, and all they're doing is sharing their vulnerabilities with the Chinese government. I think it's the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology over there. So in many ways, and this is why we've been very careful not to kind of point the finger at those researchers at all, because they could have been 100% legitimate for whatever that means in that region, and just following the law.
Well, that is an interesting thing in that law, and it's funny that you mention it, because the thing about that makes that theory fit is because it is a legal requirement to disclose the bugs to the government first, but it's not a legal requirement to then not disclose them to the vendor. I think, in fact, they encourage you to disclose to the vendor. So that would make sense. And it's just a very strange world, you would have to admit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Now, look, another thing that popped up in the report is you mentioned that that a lot of these attacks were targeting management interfaces on your appliances that were never supposed to be attached to the internet in the first place, right? They were supposed to be facing the inside of a network, not the outside. And you started to see that change when COVID-19 hit, and all of a sudden there was a rush to work from home, including sysadmins, right? So my question there is, do you have hard data on that, or is that a vibe opinion? Because, you don't really specify in the report.
Yeah. So we get kind of aggregated feature kind of functionality in our telemetry, so we can see how many administrative portals and user portals are exposed to the internet, and then we can obviously back that up with Shodan scans and things like that. It's actually harder now because we've consciously made our devices harder to fingerprint for obvious reasons. And we very much saw a big spike over COVID, and then over the last 5 years we've been trying really hard to kind of help our customers reel that back in and adopt safer configurations, because that is undoubtedly the kind of largest attack surface on our firewall. Fully featured web apps that have been developed over many years are clearly going to be obvious places to start.
It's been 83 years, basically, for some of those things, right? So, yeah.
I mean, legacy code, it's hard to deal with.
It is. So, do you know of other vendors that make products like these? Because we are seeing a freaking tsunami of attacks targeting devices like these, right? Edge devices, VPNs, firewalls, the whole thing, like just border devices. I in fact, today, we're recording this in my evening. This morning, the first call I had this morning was with Andrew Morris from Grey Noise, and he's just like, man, it's being underreported. Even though it's in the news so much, he said it's just a non-stop border device exploit carnival out there on the internet at the moment. So have you heard of other vendors trying to do this sort of thing? Because to me, this is just like an eminently sensible thing to do. It's a hunt forward type of deal. Are other people doing it, to your knowledge? I mean, I know that the EDR vendors do this, right? And AV vendors, like, they've all been doing this forever. But appliance manufacturers, like, they are not known to. This is the first that I've heard of them doing it, but are others doing it?
Yeah. So I think, and I do chat. I chat to my counterparts that all the vendors you're thinking of right now. I think we're ahead in this area. We've got a couple of natural advantages. By the way, so one, we're also an EDR vendor. So you said that kind of EDR vendors are more familiar with this. We're one of the few vendors that kind of do both at scale. So that helped. And also, I think our mid-market focus as well. We have a huge number of mid-market customers and they're more likely to keep telemetry turned on. They're more likely to accept hot fixes. Their mentality is, Sophos, can you just help us do this? Whereas if you're maybe a more enterprise-focused firewall vendor, it's more likely your teams over there are going to be like, that's my firewall. Stay off it. No hot fixes. No telemetry. Yeah, I'm not sure that's right, by the way, but I think that's that's the mentality.
It's just funny you mention it, because this is a conversation, like, in preparation for having this call with you. Adam Barlow and I kicked this around a bit, and it resulted. I did a post on socials yesterday about this, which is, these days when I'm setting up a new iOS device and it asks me if I want to share telemetry, I just smack the hell yeah button, right? Because I know they've got a good threat hunting team. I know that, like, I'm probably more likely than the average person to be attacked. I don't think I'm a particularly desirable target for a state-backed intelligence service, but I don't think, given some of the people that I speak to, that it's beyond the realm of possibility, right? And I absolutely hit that button. Crash dumps these days, people actually look at them. Microsoft does so much work with crash dumps, right? Like, if you crash an exploit against iOS or Windows, someone is going to look at that. They're going to snap the exploit and probably notify the target, right? So
yeah, that's right. I mean, the irony is, of course, that people are nervous about this from a privacy perspective, and most large reputable vendors nowadays are they take GDPR and all its equivalents very seriously. They're doing the right thing on the privacy side, and you are actually going to be getting more protection if if you are enabling that telemetry. So, which, by the way, of course, is going to potentially help you and many others preserve their privacy for what really matters, which is not low-level system data, and memory internals most of the time. It's the actual data on your. It's the data.
No,
on your device,
I know.
Right?
I also feel like I'm taking crazy pills when talking about how someone might turn off crash dump reporting for privacy reasons. That's kind of insane. So I guess what you're saying too is you would encourage other vendors, similar vendors, to be doing this sort of thing.
Yeah, and sorry to go back and answer your question. They are. I think they are thinking about it, and we've had quite a few kind of notes, just back channel notes from multiple vendors saying things like, they're watching what we've done really closely. They're looking at the reaction. Even had some of them say, ask me how I got buy-in from our executive team to kind of go down this full transparency route. So I do know, there's good people at those organizations that are, really, really working hard. They've just got a set of constraints, and I know that only too well from having worked in a large vendor for many years.
I mean, there's always good teams at some of these vendors who suck, right? That's the funny thing. You meet them and you're like, okay, yeah, these people really know what they're doing, but they're playing the hand they've been dealt.
Exactly.
Let's put it that way. Now, why do you think there's been a little bit of a blowback against this, and it's been a little bit controversial? A friend of the show, Mark Piper, he thinks it's jealousy, and that it's like you were able to go out and do the stuff that their lawyers won't let them do. But what do you think it is that's made some people, and it's a tiny vocal minority, but they're like all getting arm flappy over this? Like, why do you think that is?
To start, we certainly expected a bit of this, and we thought about dampening down our words. So we could have called the kernel implant, I don't know, in kernel telemetry collection or something like that. There's things that we could have done to obfuscate that. We consciously didn't, because the whole point of this report is to kind of demonstrate transparency and move the conversation on. So we said, let's call it what it is. It is the way that we operated it, even if there's no functionality difference. It is a kernel implant. We put it to a small number of devices. It was for an operation. It wasn't it wasn't something we rolled out across our customer base, which, by the way, is kind of weird, because I think we would have almost had less criticism if we'd rolled out.
Everyone got it. Yeah, if it wasn't targeted, right? I so see what you mean. I mean, I think by the sounds of things, what you're saying is that you just took a leap of faith. You said, let's just tell it how it is, and have some faith that most people, by and large, are going to be supportive of this. And I think, honestly, that is the way it's shaking out.
Yeah, that was it. We were very conscious about privacy, particularly, but the way I see it is, would you rather have a vendor that you trust to tell you what they're doing than just keep zip about all of this? I think if you're genuinely worried about the privacy violations that your vendor could be conducting, then A, you want to be talking to them very carefully about that, and B, you really need to be updating your threat model as well, because if you don't trust the vendors that you are, the vendors in your organization that have, the probably 3 or 4 dozen vendors that have code execution in privileged places across your enterprise, then you've got some serious challenges, and you better be thinking about kind of air gap networks pretty quickly if that's a real concern of yours. So yeah, I mean, by and large, I think the bad takes that we've seen have been pretty uninformed. There are some exceptions to that. I think the whole kind of hacking back debate is an interesting one to have. One thing that we've shown, I believe, is that it's not really a binary kind of you're doing it or you're not doing it. There's a lot of shades of grey in that debate. I'm glad we're having that debate, because we do want to kind of establish cyber norms in that space. What the right way to operate is. I think we've pushed that envelope a little bit and shown that it's by and large that we're on the right side of history. We've had a lot of support from not on our explicit actions, but generally we think that organizations like CISA and NCSC, they're saying things like, we encourage vendors to take accountability and responsibility for customer security outcomes. We felt like, as long as we're kind of guided by those principles and following that kind of guidance, then it's probably going to be okay.
Now, you mentioned this was a trial device. Does that mean it was software running on like regular computer hardware, or what was these vulndev boxes? Because that's probably why the kernel, the kernel implants may be a little bit more controversial if it wasn't running on a box that had Sophos written on it. Like, what were the people doing this research actually spinning up on what?
The majority of devices we saw were VMs. So they weren't onto bare metal. They were on a virtualization platform. But we did see some physical, one actually, maybe only one physical device as well. That was for the bootkit, because obviously, if you're gonna test bootkits, you need physical hardware.
Yeah, and so this, I mean, I understand that within a VM, that's quite nicely contained and pretty obvious what the boundary is there. On the device that was doing this bootkit stuff, did you still push a kernel module down there?
Yeah, that's how we saw it. We didn't realize there was a kernel module until we got the implant on, and that was that was definitely a moment. When we'd kind of seen this improved persistence, this kind of move away from like noisy malware, and then they started hiding in Java archives, which kind of backdooring class files, and then we saw some firmware persistence hooking as well, which I know other vendors have seen as well. And at that point, that's all we'd seen, right? And then we saw them take that next leap in persistence. It was a bit of a real kind of moment where we realized how like literally persistent they were in their efforts.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think what you've said about this adding to the hacking back discussion is absolutely right. And I guess my final question, or my final topic as part of all of this, is how much of a difference do you think this made to you, to your customers, to the security of your customers' information? Like, do you think the juice was worth the squeeze here, or was it just more of something that was academically interesting?
Oh no, it was absolutely worthwhile. So I don't know what they were going to have done with the exploits that we identified, but the two previous waves of attacks had impacted tens of thousands of customers. We're talking about talking about kind of at scale, kind of widespread exploitation. So assuming that was their goal for the next set of vulnerabilities they were researching, I mean, we reduced harm, we significantly reduced harm across our customer base. And then as we continued that program and they kind of pivoted to more targeted attacks, these were really impactful organizations that we were able to help. So, Tibetan-related organizations, governments that were trying to negotiate with China around debt-related issues. I mean, talk about being kind of outgunned there. A lot of countries in South and Southeast Asia who have been kind of having all sorts of disputes over the South China Sea, and again, kind of they're the little man there in that argument. So we undoubtedly helped a lot of orgs. There's no doubt about that.
All right. Well, Ross McKerchar, thank you so much for joining me to talk through all of that. Really, it's great to be talking about something new and interesting. I've been covering InfoSec for a long time, and it's turned into a slower moving target than it used to be. So this was really great to talk about. So thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. See you later. Bye.